Virginia Dignum, Responsible Artificial Intelligence, From Principles to Action. Virginia, thank you so much for joining us today and for taking your time to share your views on the latest developments in this industry. So I give the stage to you.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here, and good afternoon or good morning to all of you. I'm a professor of Responsible Artificial Intelligence at the Department of Computing Science at Umeå University in Sweden, and I have been working in my professional life across many industries, including a long time in academia, and I'm also very much involved in policy developments at the European and international level. And from this perspective is when I would like to share my views and my ideas about the issue of responsibility for development and use of AI systems, and how the many principles and guidelines that have been developed in the last few years can be really brought to action in a way that is beneficial for society and also for those that are developing and using these systems. I think that the question to start is what do we talk about when we talk about AI? And it's a very broad discussion and a very broad definition, and I'm not my purpose to come up with the definite definition here. What I would like to convey is this idea that, yes, when we talk about AI, we are talking about technology, we are talking about software systems, hardware systems that in one way or another exhibit properties that have been known to be defined as autonomy, interaction, and adaptability. What is important to realize, and especially what is important to realize when we talk about the impact of AI, when we talk about the regulation or the policy around how can we govern the use and the impact of AI in society, what is important to realize is that this whole discussion of whether AI is an artificial system, whether AI is fundamentally integrating people and natural resources, at the same time understanding what do we talk about when we talk about intelligent systems, which is very, very different from what we talk about when we talk about people being intelligent. And fundamentally, what I think it's important is to realize that all this software, all these applications that have been developed and are extremely successful in many areas of application, they are not alone. They don't exist in a vacuum. They are intrinsically connected with the social technical system, the social technical ecosystem in which they are developed, used, and maintained and deployed. So we really, when we talk about responsibility in AI, when we talk about AI ethics, trustworthy AI, and so on, it's not about the trustworthiness of the system per se, of the software per se, although that is of course important, but it's about addressing this social technical ecosystem, those organizations, those institutions, those companies, those people, those governments that make possible the use, development, and governance of AI systems. So we really need to address a much broader concept than just the software systems involved in the AI technology. And if we look at all the success stories of these systems are intelligent in very local ways, very localized, very focused in a specific area. And still we do have a lot of research being done in order of really transferring the successes in one area to another area, how to really develop this larger and larger understanding and use of AI systems as possible combinations of all the data that is available. At the same time, as we talk about the success stories, we really need also to look at the growing concerns around the use and the impact of AI in people and in society. There is a whole realization that this idea of commodification, this idea of datification, that actually people and societies cannot be reduced to the data that we have about them. And by doing that and by really focusing on what the data that we have, we are kind of changing the metrics for success, the metrics for viability and for interactions to something which is not so much about what we really need to focus on, but in what we can focus on because we have data about that. So it's really very important to realize this growing concern that we are maybe not focused on what needs to be focused, but much more on what can be focused given the data that it's there. And of course, data comes with all kinds of problems, and I'm not going to discuss those issues here, but it's important to understand that the bias, all the issue of bias and exclusion that is being associated with the use of many AI systems is something which is more than just the bias in the data, but it's also all this potential bias on the decisions that are taken about what is the data that is going to be used, how is this data to be collected, by who, and when, and brings them to the idea, to the realization that power structures and power imbalances is one of the main concerns when we are using and developing AI systems. Those who have the power to develop, those who have the power to determine which systems and when or not AI is being used are the ones who really are determining the way AI is used in society and the way that AI is impacting society. And the final issue that I would like to refer in terms of the concerns of AI is this very growing realization about the cost of AI systems. It has been studied that the training of one single system can be more energy consuming than that of a car for one or several years of operation. So we really need to start really looking at the cost of AI, and with that really need to look out also at other ways to measure the success of AI, which is not maybe so much in terms of the accuracy of the systems, but also in terms of this weight on sustainability issues, but also in issues on how can we balance between those many different values that we would like to adhere to. So if we have to, for instance, by giving more explanation power to a system, we are increasing substantially the energy cost of that system. How can we balance and decide between what is more important? Is it explanation or is the sustainability and energy issues? Those are very complex questions, and are questions which the decisions are really showing where the power and the imbalances in power in many cases are coming from. So responsible AI is above all recognizing that yes, we have here access to a tool that potentially really can do a lot. The question is, should AI, what and when should we be applying AI technology? What type of situations, what type of domains, what type of applications are applications in which AI is beneficial, is trustworthy, is aligned with human rights and societal principles, and who is going to decide that? And again, this is the issue of power. So the decisions of who is involved in these discussions, who is taking the decisions about what are we focusing on, what are the priorities that we are giving to different issues when we apply AI systems. That is all part of the discussion about responsible AI. It's about which decisions and how we would like AI to take decisions. Is that the discussions, and we can potentially apply AI in many different domains, many different types of decisions. It's more about the question. It's a fundamentally normative question about: do we want, we society, we users, we developers, we governments, how do we want to apply AI, and how do we want to balance between the different benefits and potential disadvantages of using AI systems? How are we going to decide between the values when we know that it's practically impossible to have it all, to ensure at the same time justice, liberty, security, sustainability, fairness, and so on. So how are we going to balance? Who is going to take those decisions? How are we going to measure the impact in all these different values? And at the same time, also realizing that it is for us, people, also an extremely complex space to navigate between what can be, what is the morals and the ethics of a certain decision, how are those decisions accepted or not socially, and how are the legality of much of what is doing, and how can we understand this complex space. So responsible AI is fundamentally looking at the lawfulness, the ethical aspects in terms of alignment with the human rights and the societal values. But it is also about the reliability of the technology to ensure that the systems that are being developed are doing what they are expected to do, and are doing that in a way that can be trusted and explainable or accountable for. It's about ensuring that the benefits and balancing the benefits and the costs of AI systems, and is doing this now from a more technical perspective in ways that can be verifiable and audited and monitored. So if we go back to this idea of the AI system, which exhibits this in one or another form, characteristics of autonomy, adaptability, or learning and interaction. When we talk about responsible AI, we are often talking about the so-called art principles, ensuring that where there is autonomy, there is also in this ecosystem the responsibility for the autonomous behavior from the system. That doesn't mean that the system itself needs to be responsible, but that we have the societal mechanisms to ensure that responsibility. In the same way as the systems adapt and learn and modify their behavior as they go, we need to have mechanisms that ensure the transparency and openness, not only about what the system is doing, but also why and what are the decisions and the motivations for the development and the purpose of the system. And if the system is interacting with us, we do need to have the capabilities for the system to provide account or explain what it's doing, and also for the institutions that are accountable for possible errors or missteps of the system. Unfortunately, a lot of principles, guidelines, many organizations in the world have been focused exactly on these issues. How can we describe, how can we indicate to users, to citizens, to organizations, to those that developed, those that use the systems, and those that are affected by the system in one way or another? What are the kind of principles guiding the application and the behavior of such technology? And if I'm not wrong, there are at this moment around 200 different types of principles and guidelines coming from many large organizations, smaller organizations, national governments, regional groups, professional groups, political groups, NGOs. A lot of discussion has been happening in the last few years, notably by the European Union, but also by organizations like UNESCO, UNICEF, the World Economic Forum, the Council of Europe, and many others, which have come up with recommendations, principles and guidelines for how to develop systems. It is good to see that, quick analysis, just a short one for the slide, that basically the main principles are universally acknowledged by most of these organizations, by most of these guidelines and principles. They are expressed at such a high level of abstraction that it's, in one end, easy to agree and to accept that, of course, systems have to take into account fairness, human rights, justice, transparency, and so on. But at the same time, that makes it the complex issue of the implementation or operationalization of these principles and guidelines, is because there is this step of interpretation. What do we mean by guaranteeing the transparency or by guaranteeing the fairness or justice of a certain system? That is still very much led to the interpretation and understanding of those that are implementing or operationalizing the systems in one way or another. So there is, in the last, and if in one end there is a lot of understanding that we really are benefiting from the development of this type of guidelines and principles. And like I said, there are many organizations doing that, and there is a lot of efforts at high-level political and organizational and enterprise levels. There is a lot of effort on the endorsement of this type of principles, but still by endorsing all these high-level abstract principles, we are still far from providing concrete guidelines for how to comply and how to operationalize the principles developed. So in the last, more recently, and that is really a development of like the 3 years ago, we see a lot of work around regulation or around operationalization of guidelines and principles. Most notorious one is probably the efforts at the European Union in terms of the regulation efforts around AI systems, the so-called AI Act that has been proposed, a draft this last year, April, and which is actually, as we speak, the discussions have started at the European Parliament in terms of really developing, moving from the draft that has been discussed and commented and addressed by many organizations across Europe, really moving into a concrete act of legal act. The discussions have started now. This regulation proposes a human-centered and risk-based approach, really looking at the systems and the areas of application that have a more impact in society, more impact in people, are more seen as more risk either from the type of technology used or from the application area in which is being used. Those ones need a higher focus of the regulation than applications which are less risk, considered of a lower level of risk. But so, like I say, this is one of the main efforts around the operationalization of these high-level principles. But we see at the same time in many other organizations, other approaches to this governing the AI systems. One big effort is the effort on developing standards, soft governance standards, which by adhering to these standards, organizations can show due diligence, but also limit liability, and not and importantly, which is and also one of the main reasons and benefits of adhering to this type of standards, is also ensuring the integration between different products and different components, and guaranteeing that the products developed in one place are aligned with components developed elsewhere. So there is a lot of work by IEEE, for instance, and ISO on developing standards for this type of more soft principles like transparency, fairness, bias, impact on children, and many other types of issues. And hopefully these standards will provide alternative ways to regulation on how to address the recommendations given by the guidelines. We also see in industry, and especially in the larger organizations, the effort to develop their own internal structures to address their own interpretations and their own commitment for AI governance and AI principles. We see a lot of effort in developing ethical panels, ethical officers, chief AI officers, and so on, which set, like I say, take an internal version and set and monitor the internal organizational-wide ethical guidelines for the use and development of AI within the organization. In some cases, we have seen that these structures are able to even veto or at least request and demand changes in projects or deliverables or products being developed within the organization that are found not to adhere completely to the guidelines they have set internally. So there is a lot of positive work being done by this type of structures within organizations. There is also a lot of effort in Europe, but also elsewhere, in terms of providing tools and metrics for assessment, the trustworthiness or the responsibility or the ethics of AI systems, in terms of checklists, in terms of assessment models, monitoring and auditing models, which show that in one end, one of the criticisms that is being given is that responsible AI is more than just ticking boxes or filling a checklist, and that might be true. But on the other hand, it provides means to assess the maturity of the system, which goes further than just this idea, which has been reported in some of the guidelines, which is more kind of black and white. Either you are transparent or you are not. But this type of assessment lists provide more the maturity levels that can describe at what level of development your product or your organization is in terms of adhering, for instance, to requirements of transparency or fairness or other requirements. But of course, all of this stands or falls with the need for education, for training, for really ensuring that not only the developers and the large organizations are aware of the impact and the consequences of AI, but that the general public, citizens and consumers alike, are also aware and can then have a voice in the discussion around the operationalization and use of AI systems. So finally, I would like also to look at the issue of regulation versus innovation, which is an issue that often is discussed. Great that we are doing all these efforts in terms of governance and regulation, but that is possibly against or curbing efforts at innovation. In my personal opinion, it is completely the opposite way. By providing regulation about what we would like AI systems ideally to look like, we are providing the stepping stones for innovation, for ensuring that developments by SMEs, by large companies, SMEs, organizations, public organizations and so on, regulations, guidelines, governance models provide the direction in which the innovation needs to occur. So if anything, regulations and governance and the principles are not only ensuring the public acceptance of consumers and citizens of the systems that are being developed, but also ensure and can be seen as a drive for transformation towards better and more fair, more transparent, more inclusive AI systems, and also can provide a way for business differentiation in which different organizations, different companies, different efforts can go in developing systems with, let's say, different flavors and different possible approaches to the same type of application, ensuring different the fulfillment of a specific set of principles. So it can really be seen also as business differentiation. So taking responsibility as a final comments here, it can be seen or can be seen in different ways. It's not just about ensuring that we have ethics by design or privacy by design. So it's more than looking at the behavior or the results of the AI technology, but it needs to include looking at the processes by which these systems are designed, are decided, and are implemented in society. And at the same time, we do need to take into account the responsibility that all of us, which are in one way or another involved in the large the chain of responsibility around the use, the governance, the maintenance, the development, the design, the research, and so on. So the role of all of us in this chain of development, that we have the role for the responsibility for the AI system. So we really need to look further than techniques that support the development of implementing responsibility and ethics in the behavior of the systems, but we really need to look at the processes and those that are developing the systems. I will go now to the end. Oops. So in conclusion, AI is potential to give us a lot of answers to support human decision making, but it's up to us still, to people, to ask the questions. And it starts with what many are calling the question zero, the question about this more normative question: when and where and why should AI be used for a specific application, which comes together with the issue of power of those that can, the ones who have the power to decide this question are the ones who are shaping the AI systems that are used in our societies. But it's also important to realize that AI applications are not magic, that we people are setting the purpose, and therefore the responsibility for this purpose is us. And we do need a much broader multidisciplinary, multi-stakeholder approach to really deal with the intended and unforeseen positive and negative consequences of AI for society and humanity. Thank you very much. I'm now open for questions.
Well, Virginia, thank you so much for your presentation. I think it was quite insightful, especially when you touched upon the ethic and responsibility aspects of artificial intelligence, which I think is a concern that has not been only raised by you, but also by famous writers such as Sam Harris, who gave a good TED talk one time about what happens if we really create an artificial intelligence that would probably turn against us.
I don't think, if anything, the artificial intelligence will do nothing. There is no intrinsic motivation of a piece of software to do anything. So if anything, if we leave these systems to their own devices, they will do nothing at all.
Yeah, but I think
it's more about our own responsibility for what we do with these systems. I'm not so concerned about the intention of the systems. I don't think that a bunch of mathematical formulas have by themselves any intentional behavior.
Yeah, that's a very good statement. I have a few questions from the audience.
Sure.
So I will start off with that before we go off. Do you think that applying AI will create more inequality in the world or not?
Very good question. It's not so much whether AI is going to create the inequality or not, but the decisions and those that have the power to decide when to use or not AI might, by the decisions you take, that we take, creating indeed this inequality. And we are seeing that at this moment, that by just looking at AI from the perspective of enhancement for business, economic reasons for using, and efficiency reasons for applying and using AI systems are creating inequalities, but we can turn the table around and identify those situations, those contexts, those applications in society in which AI can support exactly more inclusive and diverse, support diversity. We can apply AI to support the access to health and education from populations that are more traditionally excluded from those access to those benefits. So if we only look at the economic and the efficiency capabilities of AI, yes, probably we are increasing inequality. But if we really look at AI from the perspective of the beneficial role in society in general, I do believe that AI is going to decrease inequality. But again, it's a question of power. Who is deciding on how and when to use AI will have the power to determine the consequences.
Yes, because there's potentially a lot of consequences.
Yes.
Another question, could you imagine a world where AI will take over every decision making, from politics to the marketing? Do they will make better decisions for us? Will AI make
Could
a
you
better
repeat,
decision?
please? AI making better decisions. Yes, of course, the issue is the definition of better, but in many cases we already see that AI systems have superior capabilities, for instance, of analyzing images. We see that AI systems are quicker and more correct, providing identification of cancer cells in scan images or other type of image recognition systems are increasingly approaching or improving on human capabilities of doing the same tasks. What I do believe that it's the benefit is when we combine the capabilities of AI systems, for instance, on being more quick and more accurate in identifying these cancer cells in scan images, with the expertise of those people that are able to take those identification from the AI system into a correct diagnosis, and not only a correct diagnosis, but also a diagnosis who can be explained and understood by those that are the patients that are receiving the diagnosis. So it's really a tool that enhances our human capabilities and is indeed able to enhance our decision-making capabilities by providing a broader scope of possible and more accurate alternatives. But in itself, the best comes still from the combination of human expertise and AI capabilities.
Yeah, correct. I think one of the more negative outlooks, of course, in the industry also, and also on a global view actually, has been what kind of danger could AI do, let's say, in warfare? What if we can create drones that automatically target targets for us without any human intervention, and what are the ethical rules to be played there? But that's one of my key takeaways. I have one last question from the audience.
Mm-hmm.
Could you, do you think the regulations for application of AI will be followed as strictly as example for GDPR, which is a European regulation, of course, about privacy and data?
Yes. I don't think that the regulations will have the same character as the GDPR as now. I think they will be much more contextualized and much more application case, much more relative to the different case. So this risk-based approach will lead to a situation in which the combination of risks, perceived risks in the technology with the perceived risks in the domain are dealt differently than those which are less risicoful in terms of application technology and application areas. So I think there will be a much more contextualized and focused application of the AI Act than what we see this widespread measure, one size fits all way that GDPR is dealing with the privacy and the data protection. But of course, it's something which is up to the member states to develop and to, and like I said, the European Parliament just this week or last week has started the discussions.
Yeah, I think it's very important to regulate this industry as much as we can in order to. That's my last take for you. How do you see AI and misinformation? We all know that the YouTube algorithm is constantly recommending fake news to people who listen to fake news. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't think no one who listens to fake news believing that they are fake news. The problem is that those people will believe that those news are correct. AI has provided us a way to really generate much more fake news than what we did previously without AI. But already since there are news, that there are a possibility for different newspapers, different news agencies to tell their own story based on or turn the facts the way they prefer. So it's not so much that AI is doing the fake news. The fact is that there is a market and there is a model in which fake news are economically or politically relevant. That is not something which AI itself can change. It's something that we, society, can change. AI is just a tool that generates more and maybe more believable fake news. But the fact that there is a market for fake news is something which we do need to address in a societal level.
Yeah, that's a very good key takeaway. Virginia, I would like to thank you for your presentation. It was absolutely excellent, and also touching the regulation and the ethical aspects of developments in AI. So I'd like to present you a picture That will be
thank you very much.
will sent to your home address. And,
thank you. It looks nice.
Yes, and that's thank you for your contribution to our event today.